Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 69, where we'll be reviewing Star Trek Picard's latest episode, Penance. We'll start off with some Star Trek trivia.
And then we'll find out who wins Star Trek trivia right after our main topic, discussing Season 2, Episode 2 of Star Trek Picard, Penance. We're looking forward to this episode. Hope you are too. Stay with us. Well, Mike, welcome back. We talked a little bit last episode about the fact that you were not here for our previous two episodes where Scott was co-hosting. And, I kept thinking, I was wondering if, what you were going to think of our review. Is there anything you were shouting at us as you were listening? Like, why didn't you mention this?
No, I think you hit all the salient points, and it was really a good discussion. I agreed with what you were saying about Guinan's appearance on the show, not her physical appearance, but the fact of her being there. It was both appealing, to see this familiar face again. Mm-hmm. I did feel she lacked some of the energy and spark she had back in the 90s, but then again, aren't we all?
Well, but I think there was more of it in this. I think the scene when they sit on the table, I think is the stronger of the two scenes.
I think so, yeah.
And but part of that might be also us just sort of getting used to her, and
sure.
So there's that. But
I like the fact that they explained why both Guinan and Q look older. They talk about, of course, Q snaps his fingers to catch up to Picard, but Guinan says something about letting, Elarians can let themselves age a little more to keep the humans feeling comfortable or something like that.
Right. Which reminds me of Data in All Good Things.
Yeah, where he affects that gray streak.
Yes.
Because it makes him look distinguished, does it not?
It does. Almost as distinguished as his beard. But anyway.
Almost. Frankly, of the two, I thought the beard looked better than the gray skunk stripe. I don't know. But I always wondered why TNG never made any reference to, oh yes, Dr. Soong programmed me with an aging subroutine. So I choose to use it,
I thought so too. I thought somebody could come up who hadn't seen Data in a while and be like, Data, you look older. And he's like, oh yes, I will do that. And then just real quickly, morph himself back to season 1 Data. And is like, is this more pleasing? And she's like, no, that's fine. Go back where you were, right. And then you just move on, and then you never have to address it again.
And I got to say, they did a valiant job in season 1 of Picard trying to restore Brent Spiner to TNG era appearance, but time happens, and it really makes changes on our bodies, and you could tell. So.
Yeah, it does, but I have my quibbles with that. We won't get into that. I think it could have been done better. I've seen fan versions that are better, but anyway.
I will say I'd rather have that than the glassy-eyed deep fake Luke Skywalker that Lucasfilm is giving us these days. So,
well, there is that. Well, so all that aside, I'm glad that you enjoyed the episode and the episodes. Actually, my goodness,
I did
too, and it was good to get to do that. But you are here now, and rather than the apparently harder trivia questions,
I was going to say I heard some scurrilous accusations that I'd bring easy trivia to the table.
I don't think so. I don't know.
For the record, I would have been 5 out of 6 for y'all's 2 episodes.
Oh wow! So. you would have trounced us, sir. You would have run away. We had our diminished golden self-sealing Sembo that we shared.
Right.
The second episode
seal itself.
Right, and the seal it yourself stem bolt, as Scott called it.
Right. The low budget version. Well, let's get back to competing for that self-sealing symbol, shall we?
Yes, let's. Please go ahead.
All right. 3 brand new trivia questions neither of us have seen in advance. Number 1. This is the complete question. Who is Silik? Silik. Who is Silik?
Oh, gee.
I have a guess, but it's only a guess.
I think I know. It's yeah, I know. It's been a while, but I know.
Let me finish my guess here. All right, who is Silic? We will find out. Number 2. Why do the Binars commandeer the USS Enterprise D in the Next Generation episode 11001001?
I prided myself about 10 years ago on memorizing the title 11001001.
Oh yes.
So that I could always say it instead of saying, "Oh, the 1010 whatever the movie that episode is." I was like, "Darn it, it's been that way for years. I'm gonna remember it now."
Now, does that title translate to anything in binary?
I don't know. It might be like it would probably be a letter or something, but I don't know what it would be.
I don't know. We'll look it up later.
Why
do they spoil myself looking it up now? But
why do they commandeer the Enterprise?
Why do they commandeer the Enterprise D?
Okay. Okay, ready.
All right. Number 3, in the 3rd season Star Trek Enterprise episode Extinction, what changed to the opening credits started?
Oh, I know what that is.
Okay. I hope that's right.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so we will see. Our answers are locked in, and we will see at the end of the episode who got what correct. But until then, we will discuss Star Trek Picard, Season 2, Episode 2, entitled Penance. Here we are, Season 2, Episode 2. Further exploration of what Q is doing, and boy, is he doing something.
Well, that's for sure. I was disappointed there wasn't more Q in this episode, though, honestly. Because we got so little of him last week, and I thought, well, at least we'll have lots of Q this week. But not so much in the first act only. But I so enjoyed. John Delancey is so compelling as Q all the time. I think you and Scott spent a fair amount of time raving about him last week.
Yes.
Whenever, for as little time as we had him, how good he was, and he was. And this episode too, I just really, he's written pitch perfect, and he plays the part so well. I like how when he's criticizing Picard for being concerned about the crew of the Stargazer, he says, "Oh, how yesterday's Enterprise of you." He's name checking an episode title.
I love that.
But boy, where to begin with this episode? I mean,
well, we'll begin with Q, I think, because that's where we come in, and again, Delancey's so great, and there's something more to Q this time. You know, there's a weight that he is carrying. There is an anger that he has, and yet there is clearly some kind of concern again for Picard and for
and it goes both ways though too, right? Like Picard's the one who says, "You're not well."
Yes. Yes.
I mean, how amazing is it that Picard would have compassion for this guy after all he's put him through over the years? And but he does. I get the impression he does. I mean, I don't know how deep it runs, but he's concerned. And so, that's what I thought was really fascinating, that Picard knew, because I'm not sure I would have noticed maybe if it hadn't been pointed out to me, because Picard, rather Q, has had those moments of outright anger before, and especially in his earlier appearances. But I don't know. We don't know yet what that's all about. But he says to Picard, "Well, the chase is cut, Picard.
Yes,
the chase is bleeding. Yes. Chase is dying in your arms, and I am but a suture in the wound."
Yes, wow. And that struck me. That really struck me because, again, going back to, as we continue our series on TNG, we have been doing sort of a sub-series on Q. And you and I have had this back and forth about whether Q has any and when and where Q's more affectionate, I guess, relationship with humanity begins, or where he's trying to work on their behalf in some way. For him to say, "I am but a suture in the wound," to Picard was really interesting, because it's like, I am trying to save you. I am trying to rescue this situation. I'm trying to remedy something. which is really interesting because there's something really deep about that anger. Oh, and I thought it was very interesting that he strikes Picard.
Yes, that's something new we haven't seen before.
Well, you know what I had to think about was the one time that Q interacted with Benjamin Sisko.
Right.
And they got into the boxing ring, and Sisko punched him, and he said, "You hit me. Picard never hit me."
Right, that's right.
And so, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily meant as a callback, but it was just interesting that, Q decided, well, that
learned hitting is a thing at some point.
Yeah, I guess so. But just really, really interesting to see what Q is doing here, and saying to Picard, you are the board on which this game is being played,
Yeah.
and then also saying it's not a game, it's a penance.
Right.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and Picard asks for what, and Q says, "Oh, I think you know." Are we supposed to know? I mean, I was thinking, well, last week we had this whole concern about whether Picard's been able to be emotionally vulnerable with people and able to love, and is that it, or I think it's something we just haven't been told yet, hasn't been revealed. But it's
Possibly
intriguing to think what what exactly will be the penance? Setting it right, or enduring it?
And how that relates to events that take place 2 years from now.
Right. The thing that's going to happen in LA in 2024, which is the change, the temporal rescission the Borg Queen says that Q makes. Yeah, I like the interesting that Q would quote scripture through a mirror darkly as they're walking into this other Picard's, or this. It's not even an alternate reality, right? They say later it's a complete transformation.
Yes,
starting from this one point that we're going to find out about.
It's really interesting also that Q uses that line. He says, "Through a mirror darkly, and here the man who holds the glass is darker still." Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Beautiful writing of Q in this episode. Great dialogue. And that gave me pause to think maybe this is the mirror universe. And, because we've always talked about, or, in fandom in general, that we never really got a mirror universe story with TNG.
Right.
The closest thing we got was, again, yesterday's Enterprise, which we've referenced now 3 times in these 2 episodes. But I wondered if that might be the case. Although there have been comic books that went into the mirror universe in the TNG.
And Diane Duane wrote a really great novel with a TNG mirror universe.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it has been done to one degree, but it's interesting that, to one degree or another, but it's interesting that that's not the case here.
It doesn't seem to be, right? This is the Confederation of Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. Boy, before we move on from Picard's, from Dark General Picard's villa there, where he's got the skulls of Dukat and Martok and Sarek on display in his living room.
Wow.
Man, that's grim. That is really grim. Sarek decapitated on the steps of the Vulcan Science Academy in front of a crowd that included his wife and son. Nice touch.
Yes.
When Q is praising your cruelty, you've really crossed the line.
It actually, what it really, exactly. What it really reminded me of, that scene, was Lorca in season 1 of Discovery. Where he says, "I study war," and he has all these vestiges of war, all these different weapons hanging about. I felt like, Picard has become Lorca in some way, or in some way, maybe this is Picard become Shinzon. There's always that push and pull in Nemesis, that idea that haunts Picard and disturbs Picard in that film is, could I, if given the right nudge, could I myself as me become Shinzon? and and what Data tells him is, Shinzon shares your DNA, but essentially he doesn't share your soul.
Right.
And that you are essentially different from him. And
Right.
so it's interesting to see that this is a version of reality where Picard does become like Shinzon. And how that happens is really curious. Really curious.
Q says to Picard, "Now you're welcome to remain here in the body of a madman, in the world of a madman, to attempt, like Macbeth, to wash the blood from your hands. But I assure you, Jean-Luc, it's unwashable." And that's when he brings up this alternative of atonement, maybe even forgiveness. And that's where he brings up the idea that I guess the quest to set it right is going to be Picard's penance for whatever.
Yes. Which is really interesting because penance implies guilt,
Absolutely.
And
but innocent people have nothing for which to do penance.
Right. Yeah. Innocent people don't need penance. And the interesting thing is that in a certain sense, Q passes judgment on humanity in Encounter at Farpoint. He says, guilty. That's our verdict, is that you're guilty.
Yeah.
And yet Picard sort of pleads with him and gets that to be changed. But there's still this idea that even though they keep passing the test, that the trial never ends.
Right.
And so it's just curious to have him essentially call Picard guilty again, and much more emphatically than before. And
even, and of course, Q's not the most reliable of narrators and sources. So we just don't know. This is the thing. This is what makes Picard. This is what appeals to me about it in some way, although it makes it a little more frustrating to talk about. I found this true of the first season as well, which I heard you tell Scott last week you had some issues with it, and I did too. And it is never going to be my favorite season of Star Trek, whatever. But it was one tightly unified story.
Yes.
Discovery is serialized, but we can talk about each episode more or less discreetly, and how it progresses, arcs, and so forth. But with Picard, both last season and so far, again, we're just 2 weeks in, but like last week really felt to me like an overture. Like I felt like that was great. I loved it. And like a good musical overture, it introduces me to themes I'm going to be hearing a lot of, and it sets the tone, but nothing's really resolved. It's not standalone. Well, good musical overtures can be standalone, but anyway. And then this week again, wow, the things that happened are amazing, and the strokes with which the show was introducing us to this other reality, the Confederation of Earth, felt very well realized and fleshed out, but I don't know what it all means yet and where it's all going, and I am kind of even overwhelmed thinking about where it might go, because there's just so many pieces they're still holding from us, so many cards they haven't played yet. Just makes it very hard for me to kind of wrap my head around Picard as a series, which, I'll try my best. But I was going to say originally, who knows whether Q's even telling the truth,
There's something to Q, though, in this episode, that there was a depth of sincerity with him, that, like I was talking about with Reno last episode, because she jokes so much, when she appears to be very serious, that she is.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with Q. We've talked about how he can just turn, in a moment from mirthful and whimsical to deadly serious. And we see him go even farther down that road than we have before in this episode, I think. And and to a point of just real anger and real gravitas that we just really haven't seen from him before. And so I feel like Q is at least sincere.
I guess that's true. And the fact that, as we said, Picard notices he's not well, and later on he tells his allies, even as unstable as Q is, this was beyond that, this was even more so.
Right.
Which is interesting. If he's whatever Q has done is a suture in the wound, it gets to our ongoing question of how is Q like and unlike God. God intervened in a decisive way in Jesus, Christians believe, to save the world, to save us, to save creation. And so does Q see himself as doing something similar, that whatever this temporal rescission whatever this intervention he's done at a particular point in time, in a particular place, in much the way that God intervened in a particular time and place, does Q see that as, well, he says it's Picard's chance to save things, right? It's Picard's chance at penance and atonement. Atonement, theologically loaded word, of course.
Which
I don't know. It's fascinating, but I don't know what to make of it at this point.
Well, and even when you talk about, God intervening through Christ, that came through struggle. That came through suffering. That came through
a painful
death.
Intervention.
Yeah. And that's kind of similar to what the concept of penance really is. And I don't know that it's not in every Christian tradition, for sure. It's not in every religious tradition. Some religious traditions more than others. But the idea of recompense, of setting things to rights.
Right.
And of course, for many of us, we say, well, we don't have to do penance because Christ has already paid the price. Christ has already won the salvation. Christ has already provided the forgiveness and the liberty from sin. For me, and again, coming from a tradition that does not include penance, you hear of it mostly from the Catholic tradition, the idea that you would confess your sins to your priest, and your priest would say, do these acts, I absolve you of your sins, here say, 10 Hail Marys or whatever, or, do this penance, do this thing. From a theological perspective, I think a lot of Protestants are really uncomfortable with that because we say, Christ has already won our salvation. We don't have to earn it for ourselves because Christ has already earned it. But there is, I think, an acknowledgement, when it's applied well, in the tradition of penance, that even though we know cognitively that Christ has paid the price for our sins, there's often a sense that we can't forgive ourselves. And penance gives us an opportunity sometimes to feel like we've paid for our wrongdoing, even though we don't have to, just so that we can reconcile with ourselves. I don't think, and that's my view, I don't think necessarily that we have to do penance to be forgiven by God. I think God offers forgiveness freely. I don't think there's any limit on that. I think the atonement of Christ is fulsome and holistic, but at the same time, I think we are psychological beings, we are emotional beings, and we have our own processes that we must go through in order to move forward, and that sometimes what is contained in the tradition of penance can be good for our souls, can be good for our own progress. But of course, Q is not going to view it that way, is he? Right? Q is going to be holding Picard, or in some way humanity perhaps, accountable for something. Of course, I don't know how that stretches back before Picard is even born, back to here, 2 years from now.
Right.
In real time. I'm not sure how that works, but I'm interested in seeing how that unfolds. And
absolutely,
what this all means.
Yeah.
I've also thought about in this episode, there are a number of things that are said that I just thought were touchstone moments in this episode. When Jean-Luc says, "I don't know who I am, but I'm not myself." Boy, there's something to that. We're dealing with all these cosmic things about atonement and about penance and about the unwashable blood on our hands, calling back to Shakespeare like good Star Trek does,
right?
Which I really appreciate.
Absolutely.
But I feel that very much as a part of the human condition at various points in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
where we do often in our lives seek the process of understanding and knowing ourselves so that we can become fully who we are or who we are intended to be. And that can be a very difficult process. And I think a lot of us feel that way at various times. And some of it sometimes has to do with guilt, has to do with the wrongs that we've done, or the wrongs that we've
Mm-hmm.
felt or thought, whatever those may be, that we don't know who we are. We don't know who we're meant to be. We don't know what our destiny is. We don't know what our belonging in the universe or in the world is. But we know we are not ourselves. It's that
Yeah.
sense within us that something is not right.
Yeah.
That something is broken in
Yeah.
our essential humanity even, and that must be put right, but we don't necessarily know what that is. We don't necessarily know how to put a finger on it. That speaks to me, I think,
Mm-hmm.
of an understanding or a comprehension of the fallen condition.
Yeah. I think you're right to pick up on that. I mean, and talking about this sense that things aren't right, what was interesting to me was seeing how different characters did or did not easily adapt to the new situation, to this new
Yes.
brokenness. Because Seven is able to play along as President Annika Hansen fairly quickly. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying it's not a struggle for her, but she, I guess, just knows what has to be done to, okay, well, I don't understand it, but I got to do this so I can figure out what's happened and what to do about it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
she places the call to Rios, and she gives that speech at the ceremony. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was interesting. I just have a lot of unformed thoughts about the show Picard right now. But one of them was, it's interesting that she seemed to have the easiest time, and again, it's all relative, slipping into this new reality than others. Certainly, or look at Dr. Girardi. The Borg
Right.
Queen tells her, even here, you're always dealing with this sense of unbelonging. Um,
Yes.
that was fascinating.
Very.
Um,
And interesting that she would have that kind of insight. And it's true of
yeah,
Girardi's character too. It's very true of her that, especially after Bruce is gone, it's hard for her to find her grounding. It's hard for her to find her place, and when
right.
there are no synths and all that sort of thing. I think that's something that's true of her even before then, at least in the novel that I'm presently reading. Um,
Okay.
but it's interesting, you talk about Seven being able to adapt. I thought that was absolutely perfect for her character because of all of these people, Seven is most used to a strict and fairly cruel directive hierarchy. And
Yeah.
so for her to be able to fake that, I think she's the right person to be in that position,
Yeah, you're
because
right. Yeah.
she can fake that better than any of them. Jean-Luc does a pretty good job. Of
He
course.
does. He gets into it. I think Patrick Stewart's channeling his experience playing Scrooge in some of those moments.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
just again, I think Picard, having an understanding of things, knowing Shakespeare and all that as he does, and
Yes. Yeah.
has an understanding of that, so he's able to sort of fake it and get along, and so is Rafi, So they're all in
Mm-hmm.
good positions to sort of be able to nudge everybody else along. um, but it
Poor
is,
Elnor really gets the short end of
oh
things, though,
yeah,
doesn't he? Where
yeah,
your part in this is to be beaten up as a distraction,
right,
but then he gets to. Oh,
right.
this is
Then he gets to do
interesting,
his
though.
thing.
This. What do you think when he killed those guards who were
Mm-hmm.
beating him up moments before?
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if that connected at all to what Zero did to the diviner over in Prodigy. Um,
Ooh.
I don't know. I mean, I kind of felt like the show was asking us to not think too hard about the fact that Eleanor's killed these people, and okay, so it's alternate reality somehow, and
Mm-hmm.
I get it, but the way that other incident with Zero bothered you, this bothered me, and maybe it shouldn't have, because they were just, unnamed, the red shirts of the Confederation of Earth, right?
I guess so. Yeah.
So, and I'm sure we're not supposed to give it a second thought, and I don't remember too much about Elnor's experience with the co-op Malat, so I don't know if they've established him as, not hesitating to kill or whatever.
Oh yeah, they have, because when he first teams up with Picard, he takes the guy's head off.
Okay, and thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah,
and Jean-Luc scolds him for that when they get back. That's on the ship. Yeah. He says, "You are in my service. You don't ever take a life without my permission from now on," and he doesn't. But of course, he's no longer in that arrangement in this episode, and he is used to killing people. Malat do that.
that can at least make me think this is an established. I'd forgotten that, to be honest.
Yes.
So
that's all right. It's very much an established part of his character, and very much makes sense. And I think is, as you said, given the fact that they are in an alternate reality and they're looking to repair that.
Right.
There is a degree to which their actions don't have consequences. I mean, when Jean-Luc is shooting people as well toward the end of the episode, I'm pretty sure he's killing them. That's a weapon that's meant to kill the Borg Queen, so I would think that it's going to kill those other people too. And of course he doesn't want to do that, but at the same time, we're our whole goal here is to put things to rights, and so this will all be wiped away anyway. We hope, if we do things correctly. But yeah, I can understand that did affect me too. That was a moment where I was like, oh, gasp, he's killing these people. I didn't expect him to do that. And I thought, well,
right.
I don't know why I didn't expect him to do that. It's Elnor, first of all. And second of all, we're in an alternate timeline. So it kind of doesn't matter. But,
I did remember that Picard I didn't remember the Elnor stuff. I did remember that Picard, the show, had touched on such moments before, like with Seven and that planet they went to, where Picard got to give a speech about all the high-minded Star Trek values, and then Seven went back and presumably killed the woman anyway, right? So
right.
So I did remember that. Okay, that's within the ethos of this show. So but what did you think of our new Borg Queen?
Oh, very fascinating.
Yeah,
I like her. I like that they are continuing with this idea of recasting the role as needed, because the idea that the Borg Queen exists as an expression of the collective, and therefore whenever a queen is killed, they just make a new one.
Right.
I think that makes a lot of sense for the way the Borg operate. I think that incorporates the queen well into the construct of the Borg, even though it is kind of a major retcon the First Contact gave us. It works out beautifully, and I'm fascinated by how this particular version of the Borg Queen is going to function as this sort of intuitor and intermediary and helper in some way. And
absolutely. She reminded me a lot of the hybrids from Battlestar Galactica, the newer version of Battlestar Galactica, where they're organic, but they're linked into the ship, and they can calculate the jumps, and they talk in cryptic poetry and things like that. And so far, this Borg Queen hasn't talked in cryptic poetry, but she's had some poetic turns of phrase, like we talked about what she told Dr. Girardi. But I like the idea that she has this trans-temporal awareness. I thought that's a nice way to give our characters some bearing as they start mucking about in the timeline. And I like that she's basically filling the role of Spock in Star Trek 4.
Right.
When Picard's proposing time travel, he's, Kirk's Enterprise did it on more than one occasion, and they had Spock, we have the Borg Queen.
That's what's interesting. It wasn't Kirk's Enterprise, though. It was the Klingon bird of prey.
Well, he said that Kirk, and he was alluding to the fact that Kirk had traveled through time more than once, which they did. They went back purposefully in Assignment Earth.
That's true.
And there may have been other times I'm forgetting, but
yeah.
I think TOS established time travel as a as a thing we can do when we want to. They just didn't do it very often,
Right,
for obvious reasons. But
particularly the slingshot, though, they
that
definitely
is,
used
yes,
it,
that wasn't the
yeah,
Enterprise.
that wasn't the Enterprise, but still, it makes sense, and yeah, it works ultimately. But yeah, it's interesting too that like the Borg Queen is not only functioning as Spock, and then also from my perspective as a Farscape fan, functioning at this moment a bit like Pilot, being plugged into the ship,
Oh,
but also mirroring Guinan again in that episode we keep referencing without meaning to, yesterday's Enterprise, because she is the one who says, hey, time isn't right. We're in the wrong
well,
time
but they all
streams.
know that.
They all
Though.
know
It's not
that, but
just
she's the one who calls our attention to it's the time stream that's broken. Something's
okay.
happened in time.
Okay,
So in that sense, yes, Guinan was the only one who could sense that things weren't right, except for Tasha, of course, who could
that's
sense that
true.
things weren't right in that episode. But in that way, the Borg Queen kind of has that intuitive access and insight, but it's not just intuition, it's actually knowledge that she's able to
Right.
go back and piece that together is quite fascinating, I think. I don't completely know how that works, and if it probably is a bit of a retcon, but a retcon that kind of makes sense within the context of everything we know about the Borg.
Well, yeah, we know we already knew they had trans warp corridors, so it kind of
Right.
stands to reason that they'd have trans temporal capability.
Right.
Which is that even, again, like you and Scott talked about last week, how the Borg, I think you said this, maybe I'm just projecting onto the two of you. I thought the Borg had been restored to heights of scariness last week, and I appreciated that because I thought they were pretty well and truly defanged by the end of Voyager. But I liked that the idea that the Borg might be somehow spanning all possible realities is a rather chilling thought.
Yes, it is. That is true. I hadn't thought about that. And yes, there is a scariness, definitely, to the Borg's presence in the first episode of the season. But at the same time, as Scott and I were discussing, they're also apparently asking for admission into the Federation. And so there might not be so much malice to their actions as we might be led to interpret.
Well, that's mighty unclear, though, because when the Queen comes onto the bridge of the Stargazer, she gets her Doc Ock arms going pretty fast.
That's true. But at the same time, she is stunning people and, all that.
Well, that's true. She's not, that's true. But for all the scariness they have, I really, in that scene of the Eradication Day ceremony at the end, even though I knew the plan was not to execute the Borg Queen, I felt a lot of sympathy for the Borg Queen.
Absolutely.
She's brought up onto the stage to that tube and just kind of staring there, blinking at this bloodthirsty mob chanting for her death.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, of course, I know that Picard and Seven have a plan, but there's a lot of tension in that scene, and really, that scene, I thought just underscore. I mean, they've been telling us a lot about the Confederation and how awful it was, but that scene's really where they show us, because that the kind of show this government puts on for its people, it's got rock concert, political rally, circus, Nuremberg rally kind of vibes all blended together in this really disturbing spectacle. Wow, I thought that was just a very effective piece of TV and storytelling.
Yes, well, and it harkened back for me to Encounter at Farpoint.
Well, absolutely. I thought about that too. Yeah.
Without having watched the trailer, I still haven't seen the trailer, and I'm still not going to see the trailer for Star Trek Picard season 2, because I already know more than I wanted to, but it's catching up with me now, so that's good. But I had seen an image of Picard standing in front of that banner from this episode, and I thought, oh no, I don't want to see that, because they're probably showing Picard being brought before Q's court again, because that's what that banner reminded me of, was the banner in that scene. And of course, it's not the same banner, but I didn't look at it long enough to know that, because I was like, oh, click away, spoiler image, that sort of thing. but it did harken back to that, both the banner and then also that crowd. Very much reminded me of the galley, in the trial scene in Encounter at Farpoint. So it's again just connecting back to things that we've seen before in Star Trek, in new and fresh ways, and in different ways. And yeah, I did have sympathy for the Borg Queen in that scene, which is really interesting because, I wrote a piece, or actually a series of pieces, several years ago for an academic journal about the Borg and zombie lore, and placing the Borg as a form of zombie within the sort of different types of depictions that lore has taken on in popular media. I zeroed in on 3 different types of zombie, and that the Borg represented a 4th. It's kind of a hybrid of the others. And I've always had this sense about them, like Jean-Luc says in the first season, that the drones are not monsters, but victims.
Yeah.
And there's that, but also that the Borg are not a species per se, that they are not a culture. That they don't create their own culture. They don't have a culture. They just mine other people's cultures for their own purposes. But what the Borg Queen gives us is an embodiment, a personification, in this episode perhaps more than ever before, of whatever consciousness it is, whatever will it is that drives the Borg collective. Because even though all the drones are zombies, even though they basically are not the Borg, even though they say we are the Borg, there is a mind, there is a bokor, if you will, sensibility that the Queen represents, that is the heart of the Borg. And in that sense, perhaps in this season, I feel like we're going to get some understanding of how that sensibility, how that consciousness is developing, and that maybe there has been, for lack of a better term, a change of heart. That something is happening there that is causing the Borg to want to ask for admission into the Federation. And so I'm really curious to see how our sympathy for the Borg Queen is going to grow throughout this season. She's now sort of become a part of our crew in a certain sense. So,
well, right. She's essential to the success of the mission. If she's going to be the Spock of the gang, calculating their time jumps and so forth. You're talking about them wanting to join the Federation, which was intriguing for sure. Reminded me of something Richard Arnold said at a Star Trek convention I went to back in 1987 before TNG premiered. He was talking about the Klingons are our friends now because there's something even worse out there than the Klingons.
Yes.
And of course, he was referring to the Ferengi, and we know how that panned out. But that got all us fans thinking, oh my God, what could be worse than the Klingons that would make the Klingons want to make peace with the Federation? So if there's something worse out there than the Borg, that maybe sets up Picard season 3. We now know it'll be its final season. So that could be interesting. You used a word a little bit ago that I admit I don't know and didn't recognize. Well, you said a bokor or? Oh,
bokor. So
what is that?
The origin of the zombie mythos comes from is rooted in slavery. And the bokor is the
slavery or?
Well, no, the bokor is the voodoo priest who was essentially the one who was keeping people in slavery, in physical bondage, by threatening them with eternal bondage as zombies. They were believed to have the ability to own people's souls and thereby either reanimate their bodies as zombies, or keep them as zombies, as eternal slaves throughout the afterlife. And so the sense of the bokor is the one who is the zombie master, the one who controls the zombies. And so the Queen serves in the role of bokor in this sort of reimagined zombie archetype of the Borg. So That's
fascinating.
that's where it comes from. So thanks for pulling that out, because I forget that people
I just had no clue what that was. So I wanted to make sure I didn't let that slip.
I appreciate that very much. But it is interesting to bring it back to the Borg. You talk about a threat worse than the Klingons, right? Must it always be that our enemies become our allies when there is a greater common threat? I would like there to be something
like to
else.
think it wouldn't take that, wouldn't you?
But it often does. It often does. But it's interesting to me that the Borg are this, and it's troubled me for a long time, and I hope Picard season 2 helps address this. That the Borg, at least the consciousness that drives the Borg, that the Queen represents, the bokor of the Borg, the Borg Kur, if you will. I just coined that just now. I don't know if that works. But that represents a villain in Star Trek that is so menacing. Not only because it strikes at the very heart of what Star Trek is about, which is becoming better as human beings and the fullness of our humanity. It seeks to drain our humanity from us, which is, in a sense, a fate worse than death. But also that puts the Borg as this sort of irredeemable villain, which is something we haven't necessarily had in Star Trek. We've always kind of found a way. And I was thinking about the crowd cheering for the death of the Borg Queen in that scene. And I thought, how does this reflect our desire as fans to see the Borg destroyed? Because they are so indomitable, right? They are so implacable. And I think, when any character sticks it to the Borg at any time, we generally celebrate. And we talked, about Boimler wanting to save all the Borg babies and all that sort of stuff, and how he dealt with the Borg more compassionately, at least with the drones, more compassionately than anyone else has in Star Trek. It's interesting to me to think about the fact that the Borg are so monolithic and so just evil, basically, that it's really easy to just hate them and want to destroy them. And, when we see ourselves depicted as this angry mob calling for the execution of this being, does it change our perspective on our own view of the Borg?
Is there a fan desire to see the Borg utterly destroyed? I mean, because whenever we deal with the Borg, we're dealing with very specific threats. Like First Contact, for example. The whole future of Earth, the future of the Star Trek future is at stake. So, and I think even in that, though, Lily is there to be Picard's conscience and to call him out of this bloodthirsty Ahab mode he slipped into, of where he does, he'd like to see them all destroyed. We fall back, we should, the line must be drawn. But she talks him down from that, and he's at that, before he knows Data is still captive, he's willing to say, get to the islands and stay out of history's way, that
right.
We'll blow up the ship and that'll end the threat. But it's not a question of genocide. And even earlier, even in the episode I, Borg, where Picard is kind of for a while advocating genocide, they find a different way. They just find that they'll send Hugh back to release individuality into the collective, and with the hope the Borg can be redeemed. So I'm not sure I see a general desire for the ultimate eradication of the Borg in the show or in fandom. I was a little struck by how you phrased the situation there.
Well, I don't know. I feel like as fans, and maybe it's just my own perspective, but it's harder to tell those stories, because the Borg do present such a threat that it's hard to not kill drones. We've talked about that before. It's hard to not blow up cubes, and of course you're talking about the death of thousands of innocent victims when you do that. And so there's always that, but I don't feel any sympathy for the Borg. Among
no, I don't generally either. No, it's true.
and so I did feel that. I've always felt that, or long felt that, maybe the only way to deal with the Borg, maybe the way that they're set up, is so strict and so rigid that it leaves us with no option but to destroy them. And I
although
feel
I
like
guess season 1 of Picard tried to do a different thing, right? Because
right. Well,
again, I've only seen the season once, and I don't remember all the ins and outs. But Hugh was working with ex-Borg, right? They were
right.
trying to liberate them from
Right.
dronedom.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's the way to go. I think that's what Picard is kind of opening up for us, is something that we haven't quite gotten to before. We haven't quite hit yet. That has always been sort of underlying our interactions with the Borg, that we really need a third way. We just don't know how to find it. And I think it's been really easy for us as fans to just, and maybe this is just my perception, but I felt like it's been easy for fans to just say, oh yeah, we should just, I wish we could just destroy them all, blow them all up,
Yeah.
But
okay,
maybe it's just my perception. But I think this is very interesting because, again, season 2 of Picard, more than anything else, has separated the Borg Queen from the drones, which is the biggest problem with dealing with the Borg. That the thing you most deal with are the drones, and even if you kill the Queen reemerges. So now we've got a completely isolated Queen, and now we're able to deal with the consciousness of the Borg on its own, right? And not through all of its slaves, all of its victims.
Right.
And so that is, again, I feel like it's offering us a way there that is very intriguing, and I'm
well, sure,
yeah,
I can see that. Yeah. That's
So.
her motivation for helping, right? To get back to the collective. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too that we see a humanity that's become more like the Borg. As
no doubt.
Yeah, as noted in the repeated phrase, "A safe galaxy is a human galaxy." And you see Jean-Luc the first time he hears that phrase, how it pains him. And it reminds me of from Last Best Hope, the phrase "Romulan space for the Romulans." As we saw hearkened to in season 1 of Picard, where he says there were millions of lives at stake, and the journalist says Romulans' lives, and he says,
"Oh, right,
lives." It doesn't matter, right? Yeah. So beautiful, and so. This is the fuller expression of that. A safe galaxy is a human galaxy. The primacy of humans over all other species. That's got to hurt Picard so deeply when he had given so much of his life for Romulans, when so many people were saying that they shouldn't be rescued. And then in that speech that Seven gives, there are a couple things. First of all, when they're vetting it, her husband says, "Universal might or merciful power." That this execution day, or what is it, elimination day? I've forgotten the name. Eradication day. Thank you. This eradication day represents, is it universal might, or humanity's universal might, or merciful power? And she says the second.
Yeah.
Which I think is telling, again, because we've talked about how Seven was a bit jaded when we first saw her again in the first season. And I feel like she's softened and begun to rescue some more of that humanity. And when she says, this is what happens when there is a revolt, an uprising, resistance.
Yes.
Put away resistance. So that whole thing is just fraught with the idea that humanity has become more Borg-like than perhaps the Borg in this reality.
and has at some level chosen it willingly for itself, right?
Yes.
It has surrendered itself to authoritarian figures or to groupthink or whatever. I mean. And of course, it's not hard to draw lines to today's situation in politics and culture, and to Star Trek's making comments about that. But it's just I hadn't quite thought of it in those terms, but it's all the more makes the Confederation of Earth all the more dispiriting that humanity decided, in this reality, this is really the way we want to go.
Right.
What is let me find the exact phrase here. A xenophobic authoritarian regime.
Yeah, which it is. And that's very much, I feel like that's the core thing that Star Trek is constantly coming against, and that is the fear of the other. You know, the idea that not only are we afraid of the other, but that we must make ourselves superior to the other. We must dominate the other. We must think of ourselves first. You know, we must place primacy on ourselves. We must isolate ourselves. That sense of isolationism and protectionism, and our people before other people, kind of thing, which that safe galaxy is a human galaxy, really puts into stark relief the idea that we must prevail over everybody else because everybody else is a threat.
It's the same attitude the Diviner has, again, over on Prodigy, right?
Yes, it is.
That once Starfleet came, that society couldn't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
and he, you know, rather than learning some other lessons from it, his lesson is we have to take over it all. We can't coexist. We can't even talk to Starfleet.
Right. And I think it's very important that Star Trek tells the kinds of stories these days that demonstrate to us potential for a way forward in that sort of intractable situation, or seemingly intractable situation. You know, an immovable object and an unstoppable force. You know, that sort of collision, that Star Trek is really engaging that in ways that try to craft for us narratives that show the potential for moving forward, narratives that show us that there are possibilities. There are always possibilities, to quote Spock being quoted in Star Trek 2. But and so I think that's very important for us now. Very important for us. It's very hard to make that kind of adjustment in one's thinking. And my hope and my sense is that in our continued narrative with Q and with the Borg in this season, we're going to see that illustrated in some really beautiful ways. At least I hope that's going to be the case. It appears to be.
I think you're right onto it there. I think that's the kind of story they want to tell, and those are the stories that Jesus told. Mm-hmm. Right, when telling parables, you know, he made up stories, but to shock and to show people how to think about the world differently, or at least to create space where people could think about the world differently. You can't control what a parable does once it's unleashed upon its audience. They're not stories with a moral. Those are fables. Those are easier. You know, they're not allegories or one thing is always something else. They're stories that create new, surprising space for possibilities, or people do unusual things and unexpected events happen and people have to respond. And so, you know, in my professional ministry at this point, I write a lot of religious education curriculum, and I deal a lot with Dr. Amy Jo Levine's work, and she's always talking about how the stories Jesus told, and also the stories the Gospels tell about Jesus, invite us to see the world differently, and to provoke us into asking questions about, you know, how is this different because God is who God is, and because Jesus is who Jesus is. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think Picard season 2 could very well turn out to be that kind of parable for us, you know, thinking about how things could be different.
Right. And well, as you say that, the story that comes to mind, the parable that comes to mind, is the Samaritan, and that story is not just about loving your neighbor, but that story is about using someone who is the other, who is the pariah, who is the outcast in Jewish society. There's nobody more hated. There's nobody less righteous. There's nobody more unclean, if you will, than the Samaritan. And Jesus demonstrates and tells a story about a Samaritan holding up virtue in a way that most Jewish audiences would not have seen or heard told or would expect. You know, you'd most often hear about a Samaritan being evil and nefarious and scheming and what have you, much the way people told stories about Jews later on. And so there's always that other, there's always that person upon which people put things, put that negativity and of whom they expect the worst. And there's some sort of empowering feeling that people get from that, of assuring themselves of their own righteousness by pointing to the unrighteousness of someone else, even if it's invented. And
scapegoating, that's what you're describing.
Scapegoating is exactly what it is. It's exactly right. And so Jesus, of course, being the ultimate scapegoat, to literally take on that weight that is borne by oppressed peoples all throughout history, and that weight that is borne by all humanity, because we are all guilty. And that's the kind of story. And it's just interesting because it's not as though the Borg haven't earned our scorn. It's not as though the Borg are not villains. They really are, right? You know, they're not just scapegoats, but they're being played, I feel like, as a sort of scapegoat in this era, in this season. And it's just going to be interesting to see how that balances out.
They've set up some fascinating stuff, and I can't wait to see how it develops. As I say, it's frustrating because I just feel like both weeks now, like, you're just getting started. You can't stop now.
Oh, but
that's getting good.
That's good storytelling, sir. You know, you end the chapter so that the person staying up late at night reading just one chapter is going to want to turn that page and read another until about 4 o'clock in the morning. So that's
like Scheherazade, just spinning those stories, keep them coming.
That's right.
Yep.
Well, I'm looking forward to next week. And I think it is time at this point to see who won Star Trek Trivia.
Yes, I'm sure itching to know who Silik is. That's for sure.
Yes, aren't we? Okay, so we've got our answers ready. We're going
locked and loaded.
We're going to submit them in 3, 2, 1. All right.
Okay. All right. So who is Silik? Silik is a Suliban leader fighting on the 22nd century front of the temporal Cold War in Star Trek Enterprise.
Right.
And you've got that. You've got the Suliban, who serves as Captain Archer's primary nemesis in season 1 of Star Trek Enterprise. I said Silik was Sarek's Vulcan aide in the TNG episode Sarek, which is just wrong.
Good guess. Good guess.
His name fits that stereotypical Vulcan pattern.
Yes.
S, vowel, consonant, vowel, K. But,
yes.
All right. So you got that one.
Did I spell Suliban correctly?
You did not, but it's clearly that's what you meant. There's no H in Suliban.
That's what I thought I might have gotten wrong. Okay.
But no points for spelling. So
all right.
Unless a misspelling, I guess, gave us a actual different Star Trek word.
Right, that's true.
Speaking of which, there is a Star Trek version of Wordle out there now.
Oh yes, I saw you, the Treckle.
Yeah, so search that out if you're so inclined. Number 2. Why do the Binars commandeer the USS Enterprise D in the Next Generation episode 11001001? The answer is they hope to use the starship's computer to restart their own planetary computer system. You said they need to return to their homeworld to address a crisis, and they did not ask for help because in binary fashion, they recognized the possibility that Picard could have said no. So you really leaned into the why did they commandeer angle of that question.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely correct. I give you credit for that.
Thank you.
I was a little vague. I said they need the Enterprise computer to save their homeworld.
That's good. I think that works.
Do you think it worked? I mean, I did specify they need the Enterprise's computer. And the answer on the card specifies they hope to use the starship's computer to restart. So I think if I'd tried to be more specific, I would have well and truly maybe gotten it wrong. But okay, so we're going to be gracious and let me have credit for that.
Well, I mean, and we both knew, I mean, I didn't put it in my answer, but we both knew that it was the computer or the computing power of the ship, you know, in some way.
Right, and you said to address a crisis, which is, you know, not specifically restart their own planetary computer system, but so we both get that. Number 3, in the 3rd season Star Trek Enterprise episode Extinction, what changed to the opening credits started? The answer is the title of the series changed from Enterprise to Star Trek Enterprise, and we both got that correct as well.
All right.
I'm glad I read that out loud because I glanced at it. 3rd season credits change. I thought, TNG. They stopped putting Earth in the credits. They put in a ringed planet, looked like ringed version of Mustafar or something. But reading it out loud, I realized, they're not talking about the next generation. So,
right.
So the final score, I believe you get the self-sealing golden self-sealing stem bolt, because you got all 3 questions right, and I only got 2 right this time.
Hoorah! Yay! Well,
Congratulations, sir.
I am proud of my accomplishment, but in no means will gloat over it for you. So. That's awesome.
Well, that's darn gracious of you.
Oh, well, I've been talking a lot with my son about good pride versus harmful pride. Okay. So, yeah.
So you're setting a good example. That's
trying to, yes.
Excellent.
So
let him who boasts boast in the Lord.
Yes.
Not agreed. The acquisition of the golden self-sealing symbol.
I didn't remember that was part of that verse, but
well, that's the Star Trek translation.
There you go. I can't tell you how many people have asked me if I could make a Star Trek Bible, and I was like, no, I would never do that. Thank you. Oh, boy. So, Mike, what's going on next episode?
Next episode, we'll be talking about the season finale of season 4 of Star Trek Discovery.
Episode 13, which presently does not have a title.
Right.
As we're recording. Yeah.
Sure seems like they've teed up a big adventure. So we shall see.
And folks at home, you might notice that we are skipping our thematic episodes right now. We're going to do that for one more week because it's a lot to cover when we have 2 big, long episodes of Star Trek to talk about. And so we'll be back with thematic episodes after the next 2 episodes. So anyway, looking forward to that episode and hope all of you will join us for it. In the meantime, please like, comment, and share. And if you like what you're hearing, please write us a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Your reviews help more people find out about the show and let us know how we're doing.
Also, send us your feedback. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on Twitter and Instagram, and the Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or send us an email at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to discuss your feedback on the show.
And you can now support the show by subscribing. You'll get early access to each week's topical episode, plus outtakes and bonus content. Just click the subscribe button wherever you listen. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time.
I'm but a suture in the womb. I'm Mike Poteet.
And I'm Kevin Sinise. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.